This is a real face. This is not a real face. It's being animated with lines that are being drawn on a screen. And still, you can imagine that it's a 3D object. I can face this way, or that way. How? I'm not real. I'm 2D right now. But what is it that lets me look 3D? An object show face is one of the simplest faces you can draw, let's be honest, but how do you keep it looking more like a face compared to just a jumble of circles and lines? In this chapter, we'll look at two techniques we use all the time in BFB. They're only useful when you know when to use them and when not to use them, but if you do it right, it'll go a long way to make these faces look like they belong to real characters. 3 levels of blinking. We're going to make our character blink at 3 different levels of detail. Now with Adobe Animate open, we've got our character with each asset on a different layer, and we've got the 3 assets that make up the face all on the topmost layers. Level 1, keyframes without motion. The fastest way to do this is to select one frame on both layers of the 2 eyes, and then use F6 to convert it to a keyframe, and then select a frame about 4 frames later and convert that to a keyframe. Now that we've got 2 keyframes, we can go back to the earlier keyframe and swap both eyes with the closed ones. And now what we can see is if we move our playhead forward, we actually don't need to reset our eyes back open because we've stored that in the keyframe that we've made. And if we play what we've got here, we can see that it's something that's recognizable as a blink. But before we move on to level 2, I want to give you another rule of thumb, which is that the line of your closed eye should be at about the same height or below the bottom edge of your open eye. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to find this button, Onion Skin. If we click on it, these 2 lines appear to the left and to the right of our playhead, and all the frames that are between those lines show up as guides. If I move my playhead to the left, you can see how the previous keyframe is suddenly visible in blue. And if I extend this range, you can see that the next keyframe, our open eye, also appears in green too. So using these open eyes as a guide, I can actually move this down, so it's like our character's eyelids are dropping down to meet the bottom of the eyes, and maybe even pushing them a bit further. It's like how a mouth closes with the jaw coming upward. You could definitely make both edges come together in the middle, but giving it a more general direction just makes it easier to understand. And we can do that because we can see what our eye looks like in the other frame. They're like ghosts from the past and future, haunting us today. We can't touch them or edit them, but they're there to guide us. So our eyes are following the general motion of going downward when they close. On to level 2, keyframes with anticipation and recoil. The next super quick thing we can do on top of this is to add another keyframe 2 frames before, and then use the arrow keys to nudge them down a little bit further. Let's enable our onion skin again just to see what we're doing. You can see how our eyes are revealing a little bit of blue, and that's just the position of the eyes where they were previously. Then we'll go to where the eyes are closed, and we'll put a keyframe, and we'll go back to the frame where they're first closing. We'll select those frames, and then use the arrow keys to push them down a little bit further. And I should just keep onion skin enabled. This is something you can do pretty easily by pressing Alt-Shift-O. After that, we'll find the keyframe where the eyes open back up again, and put a keyframe 2 frames after that. If we go back to the original open eyes keyframes, which is this one right here, and if we nudge the eyes upward a bit, our newer keyframe still stores the original position. Now if we play our animation, we can see we've added both a lead-in and a recoil to our blinking animation. Even though it's kind of choppy, we can see how we've added a lot more life and character to our blinking animation, even while we're animating on 2s. Which is what it's called when we move on every other frame. The last level is level 3, tweens with recoil. We'll start by turning these in-between keyframes into endpoints for our tween. So drag this first keyframe so that it's touching the following keyframe. Then we'll add a new keyframe about 5 or 6 frames before the first one. That'll be the beginning of our first tween. Then you'll remember that we have 2 keyframes of our closed eyes. We'll find the keyframe where they open up and drag it backwards so that it's touching the eye closed keyframe that's right before it. Now we've made 3 different spaces for 3 different tweens. For the first one, let's create a classic tween and make it cubic ease in. Then another classic tween, and this one is also cubic ease in. And finally, a third classic tween that's cubic ease out. Let's extend this one a little bit. And with that, we've completed the fanciest level of a blink. You can always tweak the timing or change the scale or position of the in-between eyes however you want, but with those 3 levels, you now have 3 different ways to set up a blink, all depending on how much time you want to spend or your animation style. Drawing an object show face is pretty straightforward, so I won't be covering that. But moving from one expression to another isn't. There's so many ways the character's face can move when it's changing expression, even given the same start and end point. This first technique is just one way to do it. It's more of a template you can follow that'll help your character's face look more alive as it's moving from one expression to another. This file I've opened is the first scene in BFB 13, and it's by Niall Burns, also known as Zany Leaves. I love the scene because Niall's pretty much demonstrating his mastery of object show face animations. There's so many great parts of it to study that I highly recommend you download it for yourself and take a look. One thing you'll see pretty often though is how often characters blink, and part of the reason is when you need to move from one facial expression to another, it helps for that transition to be compounded with another motion.
What? Please hang out with me! If you couldn't tell, I'm busy. Come on, you're basically the only person I want to talk to anymore. And it's been so long! Yeah, but aren't you like friends with Lollipop or something now? I share a mutual friend with her, thank you, and I don't even like that friend at the moment. But could you not talk about my team right now? Well, sorry, but I feel like I have to. You need to start caring what they think of you. You're a team. That's not helping. I can't hear you. Someday you'll thank me. Sorry about that, Spongy. How about we play some table tennis?
I'd rather play ping pong.
Just like the staggering technique from chapter 1, we're adding an additional emotion to both fill things out and also hide any pops or jerks that the differences between the before and after faces might give us. Eye blinking is just one of those natural motions you're likely to see anyway, and any character can blink at any time, so it's only natural that it's such a widely used technique. In the next section, we'll learn a little bit more about how a good blink is made. So we've made a blink with just plain eyes, but if we want to transition between expressions, we're going to need to transition eyebrows too, and they're going to be different from one expression to the next. The weird thing is, when you blink in real life, your eyebrows usually aren't moving too, but for our animation, to make it look more interesting, the forehead is going to move as one object, sort of like the skin is stretching, just depending on how you do it. So I've gone ahead and added some eyebrows to our character, and you can draw some of your own if you want to follow along. So the first expression is going to have eyebrows that look like this, while the second is going to have eyebrows that look like this. The first thing though is that I noticed our eyes are bouncing back as part of the recoil at the end. Let's hop into that second to last keyframe and use onion skin. So with onion skin enabled, we'll drag these eyes down so that they're now rising into place. Anyway, back to our eyebrows. I'm going to select these eyebrows here and convert those two eyebrows into one symbol using F8. And the same with the second pair of eyebrows. We could definitely animate them separately, but just to save us some time, it usually works to just consider them as one drawing. Now we'll make our first keyframe at the same point in time as the first keyframe of the eyes, and the same with the second keyframe. We want our eyebrows to follow the motion of the eyes, so we're going to bring them down. And why not squash them and sort of stretch them horizontally? It's like they're being compressed. Then we'll bring our keyframe for the new drawing right up against our second keyframe. This marks the point where one symbol switches to another, and we're using the downward motion to hide that switch. Now let's put a keyframe matching the timing of our final keyframe in the eyes. And we'll go back to adjust this original keyframe. If we turn on onion skin, we can then transform these eyebrows, and we'll try to match the way that our earlier drawing was moving. Now the outer edges are the parts that we notice the most, so we'll try to make it so that they match more than any other part of the eyebrows. So what we've done is we've tried to continue the motion of the original eyebrows, just with our newer drawing instead. Now the hard part is over, and we can add our tweens. We'll add the same cubic ease in to our first span of frames. But then we can consider the second span to be one motion with one tween, and we'll give it a cubic ease in out, sort of to match the way the eyes are doing a cubic ease in and then a cubic ease out. But instead this tween is just going to be one tween that is just one ease, cubic ease in out. And just like that, we've given eyebrows to our character that look like they're moving with the eyes. The other technique we're looking at is masking. This is when you've got a character looking to the side and half of their face is showing, but you want the other half to be cut off the edge. Now, because it's a bit more complicated, there's a few tips I want to show you for working with faces that have masks. So if we dive back into our BFDI assets, what we can see is that every BFDI character body has both a normal version and a mask version. This mask version is a copy of the normal version, but it's flattened into just one shape, so it works better with Adobe Animate's masking. What's going on here is we've got Teardrop's normal body asset, and on the layers above it, this is the face, and it's masked to the Teardrop mask asset. So there's two different symbols which could get misaligned at any time, and we can only hope that they stay in the same place and that they stay aligned. That's why what I recommend is keeping your body, your face, and that mask all inside of another graphic, so the container graphic can do all the moving and you don't have to animate the body graphic itself. Within the container, the body and the mask are just going to stay still. That way you never have to worry about them getting out of sync if you just want the character's body to move. We just learned how to make our face movements look so much better, but before we finish this chapter, I just want to end with an example from BFDI. But this example is unique because it's animated in a totally different way from any other episode. Unlike any BFDI video that came before it, it was animated not in Adobe Animate, but using code. And part of the reason it still feels like BFDI is because the code we wrote still follows the same rules of animating that we do when we're animating normally. One way you can see this is how the bodies are rotating around their bottom edge, where the legs are attached, to give the illusion that that's where the center of mass is. But a more interesting part, which you can apply to your own animations, is how the face moves across the body. You can even see how even though the body rotates, the face isn't doing any rotation itself. No matter which way the body turns, the rotation of the face is just based off the body. From the body's perspective, the face is just straight and upright. The reason for this is something we can see when we consider our characters' faces to be 3D objects. I've used screenshots of our show as examples by adding an actual 3D cube in front of it. More often than not, the body defines where the flat 3D plane is, and the face just sits on the surface of it. There aren't any 3D models used in BFDI, but when we draw these characters in these weird angles, it helps to pretend that they are in 3D and that we're looking through a real camera. Our object show faces are usually made of horizontal and vertical lines, so for example, the vertically shaped eyes are usually going to be parallel to the vertical edges of the body, or the horizontal mouth is going to be parallel to the horizontal edges of the body. The result is that most faces aren't going to be rotated compared to the body. If you've got a super exaggerated expression though, you're free to go wild with crooked eyes and mouths, but the general rule is that the straight lines of the face are going to follow the same perspective as the body that it's attached to. And that's the end of chapter 3. We're now halfway through the whole graphy. I'm so glad you've made it this far. When you're ready to tackle more advanced body movements, I'll see you in chapter 4.